Welcome everyone to Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and just like Pickett's charge for the Confederacy, the attacks on Marye's heights at Fredericksburg elicits a range of emotions when one thinks about troops marching into certain death. So I wanted to provide you all with a first-hand account of the battle depicted by one of the most famous Civil War soldiers, Joshua Chamberlain. December 13th, the day opens with sharp musketry, followed by spirited artillery fire. Griffin's division is drawn up near the head of one of the pontoon bridges in full view of the engagement, waiting the critical moment to go in. Line after line advances to the very crest of the hill before the rebel batteries and rifle pits, checked each time by the nature of the ground and the strength of the entrenchments, no less than by the awful fire that seems to scorch them from the hillside. I see tears in the eyes of many a brave man looking on that sorrowful sight, yet all of us are eager to dash to the rescue. No more of books now, other work now. Griffin is in motion. The hour has come. It was perhaps 2 or 3 o'clock. The rebels could see us perfectly well and had the range of the bridge and roads through which we had to pass. Shot and shell were plunging and bursting around us all the way. We kept under cover of the city as well as we could, though every street was raked by cannon shot. Emerging at last in rear of the town and in front of the fire, we halted under the partial cover of a slightly rising ground, but precisely in range of the hottest fire to form our line. The dead and wounded lay thick even here, and fragments of limbers were trampled underfoot. Some of our men fell here. Suddenly 2 new batteries opened. It seemed as if the ground were bursting underfoot, the very sky were crashing down upon us. The bullets hissed like a seething sea. In the midst of the hellish din we heard the bugle call the 3rd Brigade. I was standing with the colonel in front of the colors. He glanced up at the batteries. "God help us now," he said. "Take care of the right wing. Forward the 20th." And forward it did go, in line of battle, smooth as a sunset parade in the face of that terrific crossfire of cannon and rifle, and underneath the tempest of shell, its gallant commander in the van. For some reason the 2 regiments on the right of our brigade did not advance with us, and our right wing consequently took the flank fire, as well as the torrent it breasted in front. On we charged over fences and through hedges, over bodies of dead men and living ones, past 4 lines that were lying on the ground to get out of the way of the fire on the deadly edge, where they had seen so much desperate valor mown down in heaps. We moved in front of the line already engaged, and thus covered, it was enabled to retire. Then on the crest of the hill we exchanged swift deadly volleys with the rebel infantry before us. From there Chamberlain and his regiment pulled back to the dip in which the regiments were hunkered down, avoiding the rebel fire. Darkness had now come and the firing slackened, but it did not cease. We felt that we must hold the position, though it was a desperate thing to think of, for the rebels, knowing the ground, might flank us in the darkness, and to be found under the very guns at daylight would be offering ourselves to destruction. To retire, however, was to expose the whole army to defeat. So we lay on the trampled bloody field. Wet and cold it was too, and we had no blankets, the officers I mean. Little sleep was had then and there, I assure you. Our eyes and ears were open. We could hear the voices of the rebels in their line, so near were they, and could see many of their movements. I did sleep though, strange as you may think it, in the very midst of a heap of dead, close beside one dead man. Touching him possibly, the living and dead were alike to me. I slept, though my ears were filled with the cries and groans of the wounded, and the ghastly faces of the dead almost made a wall around me. It was very cold in the night, and we suffered. Mr. Brown and I wandered over the field, hoping to find a blanket or an overcoat on some dead man, but others had been there before us. Once, on such an errand perhaps, or it may be to find some friends, a man came and lifted our coat capes from our faces, peering into our eyes thinking we were dead. The morning broke, Sabbath morning, silent, serene. There we lay, a little handful in a slight hollow on the hillside, and only thus protected from the batteries and rifles that swept the crest before us, and behind us too. No man could stand without being shot down. Troops ordered to our relief could not come up without being annihilated. The aides that sought to bring us orders, riding at full speed, had their horses shot from under them the instant they reached the crest behind us. The enemy tried to dislodge us by shell, but they did not succeed in bursting them exactly over us, and the shot that swept the 2 crests just skimmed over our heads if we kept down. Next they sent 300 or 400 skirmishers to get a position on our flank under the cover of a ravine. We had to build a breastwork in the midst of their fire, and under this shelter we succeeded in driving them off with our rifles. We kept up the firing all day in momentary expectation of some desperate attack, but resolved not to flinch in that fiery ordeal. At last, on that second midnight, having been in that hell of fire for 36 hours, an order came that we were to be relieved, but our dead lay around us, and we could not leave them thus. We will give them a starlight burial, it was said, but heaven ordained a more sublime illumination, as we bore them, the forms of our fallen heroes, on fragments of boards torn from fences by shot and shell, to their honored graves. Their own loved North lifted her glorious lights, and sent her triumphal procession along the arch that spanned her heavens, an aurora borealis marvelous in beauty. Fiery lances and banners of blood and flame, columns of pearly light, garlands and wreaths of gold, all pointing and beckoning upward. Who would die a nobler death or dream of a more glorious burial? Dead for their country's honor and lighted to burial by the meteor splendors of their northern home. Then, making sure that our wounded had all been gathered, cold we, the battle-worn, we entered the town and bivouacked for a few hours on the pavements. Once then, before morning, we had to rally to repel a night attack, but in the morning we were ordered to prepare immediately for action, and had scarcely fallen asleep on the next night when our brigade was called to arms, and in the darkness and silence we marched over that fatal field once more. We felt that something was at stake, and creeping cautiously up to the very edge of the rifle pits, we collected a few picks and spades that had been brought there, and used them with a will, you may be sure. We protected ourselves as well as possible by throwing up a little breastworks and sinking pits, but just as we had nearly completed our work, a hurried order came to retire in perfect silence and recross the river. This was our part in the Battle of Fredericksburg.